If you want to become a better leader, not just for your organization, but for your community, for your family, for your friend circle, then you're going to love the guest that we have here today. He's the author of the 10 Habits of Influential Leaders. His name is Brian Rollo, and we're going to talk all about leadership and how it applies to your professional and your personal life. But if you're new to this YouTube channel, my name is Brandon Eastman with Be Better Industries, and we talk about how to perform at your peak so that you can amplify your success in life. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you see all new videos that we release every single week. And be sure to hit the like button so that this interview and video can go to more people who want to improve in their leadership ability. Let's get right to the interview. We are joined today by Mr. Brian Rollo, who is a leadership expert and the author of the 10 Habits of Influential Leaders that came out at the very end of last year. Brian, it's a pleasure to have you here, sir. Thanks for being with us.
It is a pleasure to be here, Brandon. Big fan of, as you know, of everything you do and your content, and it's an honor for me to be here talking with you. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate the kind words. Let's jump right into things, Brian. You know, a lot of people hear the word leader and they hear manager, they hear boss. Let's just cut right through all of it. And let me ask you this. What is a leader?
That is a really great question, Brandon, and it seems simple. I don't know that the answer is. As I do this work, I've heard people with all different types of definitions of leadership, and it can be tough to nail down, but I'll give you mine, which I think is an imperfect definition, but the best one I have. I think leadership is helping people rise to challenges at its heart. You know, there's a lot of things we do routinely that we don't necessarily need leadership in. There's a school of thought, which I subscribe to, that if you know how to do something, you don't necessarily need leadership. That's when we're growing that we need leadership. You know, if so there's somebody here that drives to work every morning, my guess is you don't need a leader to jump in the passenger seat with you and say, you better do a great job driving to work, right? We know how to drive to work. Where we need a leader is when we are being asked to stretch in ways we haven't stretched before. When we have a challenge that maybe we haven't overcome before and we don't know how to do it by ourselves, or we need some encouragement, we need some help. So at its core, I think a leader is a person who helps that person rise to their challenges.
Wow. I didn't expect you to say that you don't know the answer and then to go into that. That was a really cool twist. It sounds to me like a leader is in essence a coach of sorts.
Absolutely. And a real point I want to make is that leadership isn't doing. A lot of people get hung up on leadership as a theoretical concept, as an academic concept, and I'm part of that. You know, we talked about this a little bit beforehand. Like I'm there for that. I'm there for the 900-page books or the white papers on leadership, right? I absorbed a lot of that, and I think if you read my book, there's some distillation of that. But at its heart, leadership is doing something, right?
Mm,
And it only exists when there's at least two people, one helping the other get to a new place.
that's a great point. It's a great point. I think it's important to ask. My audience watching this, they're watching all the videos on my channel and they follow me because they want to hear about strategies that can help them improve their life. They want to set goals. They want to achieve those goals. And essentially, we're all doing this to be happier, fulfilled, successful, whatever you want to call it. They might be wondering, why is there a leadership expert on the call right now? Right? So I guess the question is, how can learning leadership skills and really diving into the world of leadership help someone to improve in their own personal life?
I love that. So, you know, to be totally upfront, a lot of my leadership training, expertise, experience comes from corporate America, right? So I learned a lot of the stuff, or it's where I applied it. And I think my book does really well in those environments. But I have to tell you, a couple of the most meaningful reviews / feedback I've gotten on my book came from unexpected places. One person said it was one of the best self-help books she'd ever read.
Wow.
I didn't think I was writing a self-help book, right? I thought I was writing a leadership book. And I think a self-help book with, you know, I think your content, you know, is great at that. So I wouldn't, you know, dare to throw mine into that same sort of category. But the fact that somebody found it and was able to apply it in her life,
Mm.
She's a solopreneur. She has a family. She has hobbies. Like she's like this helped everywhere. And
Wow.
then another one, a mom of two, came to me and said, "This has helped me raise my kids." Again, I think I'd be the last person to write a book about helping people raise their kids. But if somebody's taking this and applying it and finding it works there, that is super meaningful to me. And then I think, to go back to our definition, is a leader helping people rise to challenges? It's got nothing to do with a job or title necessarily.
Mm.
Like if somebody's coming to your channel and watching your videos, I mean, you are a leader, right?
Yeah.
No, you don't have the nameplate that says I'm Brandon, your boss. Follow me, right? But you are a leader. You are helping them rise to those challenges. And I think we all have situations in our life, especially if somebody's taking the time to watch your content,
Mm.
where they want to make that happen.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that it's not a self-help book, but it really is, because you talk about a lot of amazing things. You talk about integrity, you talk about character, you talk about growing in those things. And everyone watching this video right now is a leader at something, right? They're a leader for their family, like the mom of two children that you mentioned. They might be a leader at work. They might not. They might be a leader without the title, like you just said. They might be a leader in their community. So what we're talking about right now applies much deeper than the workplace, applies much deeper than in business. Let's take character for a second. The first main chapter of the book, I think it might be principle number 1, I might be wrong, but it's about character and it's about integrity. And characters, I feel like it's a very abstract idea, right? We say have great character, but really, what is that? And I guess the question is, how can someone take that and build and improve upon their character?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny when I started writing the book. I think it's actually a couple chapters in, and it's right after the one on ethics. And at first, as an author, I thought to myself, do I really need a chapter on character if I just spent some time talking about ethics? Are,
Mm.
are they are they the same thing? And they're really not. Character is revealed in times of crisis. You know, everybody would like to think they have great character, but it's only really revealed when we're put to the test. So you can have ethics all the time, but character shows up when things aren't going our way, right?
Yeah.
Character shows up when we got dealt the hand we don't like. And we have a choice as to how we are going to respond to it. So I think integrity is a great part of it. Like that's where it starts, is developing integrity, and we could delve into that. Part of it is competence. Part of it is like the will to show up as your best self, no matter the circumstances, and being able to do those things when the world is sort of stacked against you. I think that's when we start to see our character.
So if character arrives in a time of crisis, how can you exactly how can you prepare for that crisis before it arrives? Like how do you know you've what your character is? Should you wait until the crisis happens? Is there a way to prepare? What do you recommend?
Well, absolutely. Crisis. I always like to say crisis is a truth serum, like sort of the same point. Like this shows who you really, really are.
Mm.
We've all been around that person who talks a big game, but when things start to go against them, or when things start to fall apart, not quite the same person. So, preparing for crisis is first of all making sure that we have that confidence. And secondly, realizing that crisis, by definition, is an unexpected event. Right? Let's think of the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
It's a crisis. Like we don't schedule a crisis, right? But that does not mean impossible to prepare for. To your point,
Yeah.
one of the great exercises I walk people through in the book, you know, a do we have an eye on the future? Because if you are an expert in whatever it is, like whatever area you're wanting to lead people,
Mm.
whether it's your YouTube channel, whether it is at work, like knowing your industry, knowing your field, there are ways to have a good idea as to what's coming down the road. Like you don't know specifically the crisis, but there are ways to prepare through study, through being around our leaders, so we can sort of have an idea of what might potentially happen.
Yeah.
And then I think part of it too is simply doing an objective exercise, Brandon, as to testing yourself in those situations. My old job, we used to have what was it called? A disaster response plan, right? And if you ever, and we would do tabletop exercises.
Hmm.
That would be, we would sit down and somebody would say, all right, our whole community has lost power. How do we keep things up and running?
Wow.
And people would have to come up with answers as, here's what I would do. And usually it doesn't come to you right off the top of your head, but you'd have to go back and you'd have to furrow your brow and you'd have to brainstorm with people on your team. You say, all right, we could do this. We could do this. And you come up actually with a plan as to what would happen if that disaster struck. Now, if the stars align, we never have to do that, right?
Yeah.
But we have a plan. So I would say the same thing for crisis. Like use that first part and sort of determine what could happen, and then walk yourself through that same tabletop exercise. I think I talk about using index cards in the
Hmm.
book.
Yes.
And like, what is my response? Like, Brandon, YouTube cut your YouTube channel off, right? Crisis. I lose all my followers. Crisis, right? Super unpleasant things we'd rather not think about. And there's worse that could happen. Those are probably, well, I respect, pretty trivial in compared to some of the bad things that could happen to any of us.
Yeah.
And then really plan out our responses. At least think about it. Put yourself in that mental state where if this happens, here's how I would react.
Yeah.
And then part of it too, and I might be going too deeply into this, so steer me back if you want.
It's great.
This really comes down to your values, right? Go back to a corporate example. I can think of companies that had crises arise and they didn't lean into their values. They leaned into, how can we make ourselves look good?
Yeah.
How can we pretend this never happened? How can we try to get people to stop talking about this? Right?
Yeah.
And it's that old adage, sometimes the cover up is worse than the crime, right? And I don't mean crime in the wrong way, but I mean, think of crisis. I'll use one that, I've used several times, and I don't mean anything bad about this company, but for those who are in financial services, Wells Fargo is like the poster boy for how to continually kick themselves, right? And make life worse. They had a struggle a few years ago where they got caught perpetuating a process where they were basically defrauding people, right?
Mm.
And their response was to pay it lip service and say they were going to change. And they came up with some really cute slogans and some really heartfelt videos they put out to the world.
Hmm.
And changed absolutely nothing. And
Wow.
in fact, they tried to at first blame their employees. Well, we never taught people to do this. This was these rogue people who were out there. It wasn't us. And a year later, they were in the same boat. Their execs got called before Congress. They fired one CEO because he wouldn't change. They brought in somebody else a year later. He was in front of Congress. They fired him because he wouldn't change. And I'm sure they have good people there who want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But their response to this crisis was not to dig into the very same values that they had on their website. Because if you were to go read about them, what they say about themselves, they'd talk about integrity. They'd talk about caring about people. They'd talk about doing the right thing. But their response to crisis wasn't that.
Yeah.
It was, how can we make ourselves look good? How can we pass the buck? So it's a long-winded story. And this comes back to character, right?
Yeah.
This comes back to your question about character. What are we going to lean into when this crisis comes, right? Are we going to lean into short-term fixes? Are we going to lean into pretending it never happened?
Yeah.
Or are we going to say, how is this an opportunity for us to live our values? Like, how do we even get here, by the way? Because sometimes we create our own crisis, like the company I talked to you about. Sometimes we don't. But how is this an opportunity for us to live our values?
Absolutely.
And I think anytime a big crisis comes, you will see people and companies on both ends of that spectrum. And the ones who move us, by the way, are the ones who lean into their values. The ones that do sustainable things are the ones that authentically address things in a way that aligns with what they've been telling us they are all the time.
Yes. Let's stay on values for a second because I really like where this is going. And then we'll bring it back to crisis.
Yeah.
Do you personally have a list of values that you wrote down, or how do you, weird to ask, but how do you keep track of your values? How do you know what's most important? Is it in your head? Like, how do you personally do that? Keep track of it?
Well, that is that's a fantastic question. And I think, if I were doing this on my own, if one of your listeners wants to do this, I think it starts as simple as with a pen and paper,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I would go back and think about times I was in crisis, right? And times I showed up as my best self and what I like about how I responded, right? What do I like about that?
Hmm.
When this happened, like, tell a story to yourself and relive it and, like, what do I like about how I showed up? Because the flip side of that question, and this takes for some real objectivity, what do I not like about how I showed up?
Mm.
And sometimes we get to our values by seeing the flip side of the things we don't like. And, I'm sure everybody here has in their head a list of, even if it's not, tangible, a list of what they find important in life. But I definitely would recommend making it tangible.
Yeah.
I go through a coaching process, and my guess is you do some of this very same work where we actually do this with people.
Mm.
And it starts out, and in the end, we come up with some really concrete statements, which are probably more true to that person than anything they've done before.
Yeah.
Because it's not me telling them, hey, this should be important to you. Or it's not Brandon pointing a finger in their face and saying, yeah, you should care about this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's really what they are. So if somebody is doing this on their own, that's where I would start. And it's one of the ways I do start. Like, tell me about a time when things were going against you and you responded. And when did you do that great? And when did you do it not so great? And I think if we work from there, we will find out how we best express our values. And also, that work itself can't do anything but tell us what's important to us because we're using our own responses.
It's so important too to be very objective when you're looking back at that too, because it's easy for, like, I have a high ego, right? It's no lie. I'm conscious of it, but I work on it all the time. I work to listen to others, make sure I hear what they're saying. But at times I can look back at a situation that I might not have handled the best way. And I can say, well, I did my best. I did as good as I could do. I don't really know what else I could do. But then I have to stand back and essentially, like, go out of my body just for a minute and say, if there was something that I could have improved on, what would that have been? If there was something I could have done different, what could I have maybe done in a different way? And even if you personally, if it attacks your own ego, maybe just lower that barrier just to get those things on paper. Because if we can't do that, then we really can't make a change.
Right. Oh, I love that. And I can go a number of ways in there. But I was just having this conversation actually with somebody recently, and you know, they said, "Well, I try to be humble, but I also have an ego."
Mm,
And I've heard that many times. And, I think for any of us, those two things are not mutually exclusive.
yeah.
I think without going on a tangent, I think any great leader has to have a sense of humility and a sense of ego,
Hmm.
right? They have to believe in themselves. You believe in yourself because you've done great things, and you have shown up, and you have to have that. Without that, you won't show up for your people. But that sense of humility to balance it,
Yeah.
also very important. And to your point, I think they can be tools we employ if we're really objective at different times, depending on what's needed. And then talking about the objectivity, this goes back into another point in the book, which I think you had mentioned to me before, of a slightly different application of that whole dance floor in the balcony.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about that objectivity, we're talking about getting on the balcony of saying, all right, I'm going to literally picture myself up and above what's happening, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to observe my own performance, not as I'm emotionally in it and living it, but as an objective observer who's just has taken a step back to look at it. And I'm not going to be emotionally impacted by what I see. Because when we're in it, it's really hard to separate ourselves from those emotions. So that little mental trick, if you will, or mental discipline of saying, I'm going to stand back and be a neutral observer and not let the results emotionally sway me either way. That's an important step to do sometimes. And it can be tricky, right? Until you get used to it. But so important to be able to objectively analyze ourselves.
Wow, so interesting how you go out of yourself. That's the balcony. And when you're in the day-to-day actions, you're on the metaphorical dance floor. That's such an awesome way to look at it.
Yeah, and we need to do both, whether we're talking about leaders or whether we're talking about just, individuals in our lives. I think it works both ways. There's times we need to be fully present with our emotions. There's times we need to be enjoying the ride. There's times we need to be, acting on gut instinct. And then there's other times for us to say, yes, that's important to me, but that's not going to be the sole decision maker in how I live my life. Like, there's a part of me that needs to be strategic. There's a part of me that needs to be objective and really make sure I'm thinking things through.
Well said. 100%. Okay, let's take this and let's talk about organizational leadership, right? I work for, as you know, a large sales company. So I work with leaders all of the time. One of the biggest questions I get is, Brandon, I've been doing this for a long time now. I think that I might want to move into leadership. What would you say to somebody who wants to move into leadership is the first thing that they should start to focus on if they want to move up in the ranks of the company?
Yeah, great. So we're talking organizationally now because my answers are going to be specific to that. So, like, I'm not saying this is what you would do to your kid, right? Self leadership, right?
Yep.
I want to be clear on that because I think, and this might be even so basic that it hadn't entered into your thinking when you asked this question. But from an organizational standpoint, I've had this conversation many times with people.
Mm,
And the first step, and this might seem sort of cold for me to say, the first step is you better be really good at your job,
okay.
right? The first step is you have to have that competency,
Mm,
and you have to be really good at what you do. There's a reason why, if you're looking at a football team, the quarterback is more often the leader than the person who never gets off the bench,
mm,
right?
yeah.
Because that they have that competency, it gives them that freedom to lead. So sometimes people will come to me, and this might have happened to you, and they want to be leaders. They think they can be leaders, but like the performance isn't necessarily there yet to enable that. And that's a good problem to have, by the way. That is a good thing. They're future focused, but that is the real first step, is make sure you're really great at what you're doing, because that gives you the ability to lead other people. And without it, people get this sort of weird reaction.
Yeah.
That being said, if somebody's there and they want to be leaders, I think two things are necessary for them. One, they have to have a sense of vision, right? And so if you're talking to that person, that's one of the things you would want to be thinking about. Do they have that sense? Again, we're back to the balcony. I hate to keep doing this, but do they have a sense of things bigger than themselves?
Yeah.
Because not even all high performers have that. There are plenty of people in organizations who are great solo performers, right?
Yeah.
They are great at doing their thing. And that's awesome. We need those people in organizations. But I can't tell you, Brandon, how many people I've dealt with in my life that found themselves in positions of leadership, quote unquote, that discovered they didn't really want to be there. And I asked that. They said, I hate leading people. I hate everything that comes with it. I said, how do you get there? How'd you get there? They said, well, this is the next step for me. This was the promotion. And so I thought I had to do it. I would caution against that. If leadership and vision, in the next step, I want to talk about empathy, would be the other thing I think you need to look for, is a sense to see beyond ourselves and the sense to see how other people are seeing things,
Okay.
right? If they have those two qualities, I think those are great markers for leadership, for a leader. But without them, like if doing those things is comparable to your mom telling you to eat all your vegetables when you're a kid, I'll suffer through them if I have to get the position. Probably not going to work really well in the long run.
Yeah.
So if I was working with a young leader, somebody um, who had that objective, I would talk to them about A, first establishing excellence,
Mm-hmm.
and B, I'd want to get a real sense of where their vision is and the degree of empathy that they possess.
When you say their vision, what do you mean by that?
Can they see beyond themselves? For instance, when you're a solo performer in a company, and by solo, I don't necessarily mean you don't have teammates, but I mean that's your main concern is getting what you do done. You're not responsible for other people. We see things through that lens. And if our manager or boss comes to us and tells us something we don't like, our primary reaction, even though we might go along, like, this is stupid. I can't believe they're telling me I have to do this. Right? Why do I have to do this? This doesn't fit into my world. The visionary person realizes, yes, it's uncomfortable, but they're able to see the bigger picture.
Mm.
Right? They're able to understand and act in a way that shows that they understand. Yes, I'm being asked to do this. Yes, I might not like it. Yes, this is going to make things harder for me in the short term, but I get it. Like, I get why the company needs to do this.
Got it.
I get why my leader is asking me to do this. And although personally it's not great for me, I understand the vision and I'm on board.
Let's take this a little bit into left field now.
Yeah.
Let's say the company, the organization has a vision and they are pushing that vision. They're pushing a new initiative
Mm-hmm.
onto the leader that the leader knows isn't in alignment with the vision. And they feel like, listen, I know that you want me to do this, but I don't think like value based, this is the right thing to do. What would you recommend to a leader who's in that ethical dilemma of, is this the right thing to do based on my values, just because the company wants me to do this? What do you think about
Ooh, now we're getting into it.
that?
Well, I would say, first of all, there is certainly there's no easy answer. I think one size fits all to this.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of being a professional, part at working at any company, I think, is figuring out our level of willingness to compromise.
Yes.
And at what point that crosses an ethical boundary that we can't go to. Right? We need to know that.
Yeah.
We all have to compromise sometimes. I've never worked with a leader or known a leader that did not have to sometimes get in front of their team and sell their teams on things on decisions they necessarily wouldn't have made if it were up to them.
Hmm.
Right? That's part of the gig.
Yeah.
And that's part of the balcony that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
But I think that is a different thing than saying this crosses an ethical boundary that I can't cross.
Okay.
Like if this is violating, and not even so much company ethics, but part of it, like my personal thing, like if I'm being asked to lie, I'm being asked to deceive people, I'm being asked to do something that is going to harm people, I think at that point, if we're there, there's a couple of options. One is, taking that message and marching with it,
Yeah.
to the people who are in charge of values and finding a way to make that message clear and your viewpoint because it's without a doubt valuable.
Yes.
And if that fails, I think everybody has to ask themselves a question as to whether or not this is a path that they can keep going down. And I think everybody has to answer that questions on their own. But in my mind, if you're good at what you do and you're valuable to the marketplace, it's not very much of a win to keep doing things that you find unethical. Because
100%.
there are places where you won't have to do that will appreciate you.
That's a great point. That's why I wanted to ask, because I've seen situations where maybe it was just that leader's perspective that what the company was asking wasn't the right thing. But it might have just been that individual, not the company themselves.
Yeah, without a doubt. And part of it goes back to vision too, right? Every level, you have to be able to understand, ask yourself if you see the vision. And here's where companies, by the way, do a bad job sometimes, is they're not really transparent about what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes people confused. For instance, if you were, and I've seen this before, if you were in an organization that perhaps was not really sales oriented, not really upfront with sales, not that it wasn't important, but not really like aggressive about it, proactive with sales.
Yeah.
And we've got a board of directors and executive suite that says we want to move to a sales environment, and you're not really good about communicating that message, change starts to feel to the people down the line like an abandonment of values.
Mm.
And I'm just using sales as an example. You can think of any cultural shift that an organization might do. If we're not really careful about communicating that down the line, people start to feel like, what's going on here?
Yes.
And so we're not even talking about, here's where, again, we get a little difference between ethics and stated values. And when those start to shift, people start to feel confused. They start to detach. And I think that falls both on the person to realize things are never going to be perfect for me. I'd love it if everybody explained everything to me, but I have to realize in a real world environment that might not happen all the time.
Yeah.
But also organizationally, to manage change a little bit better.
Great answer. Well said. You talk a lot about at some point comes a time where as a leader, it's time to start growing other leaders behind you, right? And I know that you've worked with leaders in the past where they were slightly nervous to start helping grow other leaders behind them for the obvious reason that they might think that that newly grown leader might take their position once they've rose them up to that point. So how can a leader get past the idea of this person might take my job if I make them too good or maybe better than me? How can someone get past that?
Oh, I love that question. When I coach people, by the way, like this is one of my favorite days. Because this really gets into people's inner deep motivations. If somebody, you're the mindset guy, so I want your take on this as much as mine, because I think if somebody is resistant to that, it's not necessarily a work thing.
Yeah. Wow.
I
Very
think
interesting. So what is it then if it's not a work thing?
I think it's an insecurity thing.
Hmm.
I think it's a scarcity mindset thing.
Yes.
I think it's an I'm not good enough thing.
Yes.
And so it's manifesting itself in this way because any change to them feels like something I might not be able to deal with.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough on my own. I'm not ready to handle this. And sometimes people have been like raised in that environment, I don't mean raised as children, although maybe that, but raised in a business wise from that environment.
Mm.
Everybody's looking over the shoulder all the time, right? There's
Yeah.
not a lot of psychological safety. We perceive people around us as threats rather than allies. And at its heart, I think that's what it is. And so, like, when I'm working with people on this brand, I see tears a lot,
Wow.
when we dig into this, because that's where we're getting to with people. Somebody with this mindset, almost without a doubt, that's where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily intentionally. I think I use the example of Tina in the book. And I was just coaching somebody on this the other day. When you get to be known as somebody who creates leaders, and this is, I think, is maybe a more direct answer to your question. One option, by the way, is somebody who creates leaders, somebody who is focused on it, somebody who's, for lack of a better word, a rainmaker. Right? That's starting to get, Tina is a good example in my book. She got starting to get the reputation that if you go to work for her, bigger things are coming.
Yeah.
So, yes, did she lose people? But guess who was always there to replace them? Somebody else with ambition, right? Another high performer, and she had a supply of them. Every time she had a vacancy, she had somebody else who wanted to do great things and was great at what they did. Now, versus somebody else who doesn't believe in that and wants to keep everybody ramped down just where they are, what kind of people you think they're attracting. High performers aren't going to go there.
Nope.
You will attract people without ambition over time,
Yeah.
and people that are just fine and happy being average. And that makes, by the way, your job as a leader much, much more difficult. Right? You're going to be attracting people who aren't really motivated to do great things,
Yeah.
who aren't motivated to be excellent. And I think, although it seems counterproductive, like the first mindset is much, much more powerful and makes your job as a leader much easier in the long run.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, it's much easier to manage high performers than it is low performers. Right?
So true.
So which team do you want to lead? That's a very 2-minute summary of like an afternoon's or day's worth of work. But that's what it boils down to.
That's great. And I think along the same thread, so what we're talking about is that scarcity mindset, right? If I raise this person up, they'll take my role because there's not enough opportunity to go around. I've also seen people not move up into a leadership role, even when they might be fit for it because of that scarcity mindset, where they say, well, I don't even want to try to go for this because I don't see that job or that opportunity available right now. Tina already does that. Why would I try to be a Tina if she's there? And I've seen people who say to themselves, while that position or that role or promotion might not be available right now, I know that one day it will be. And when it is, I'll be ready to take it. And again, those are the high performers who think in that mindset. And what happens is sometimes something that they didn't even expect, a position or a promotion that they didn't even think about, became open. And because they were now prepared, they moved into something they didn't even know they would enjoy or would want.
Absolutely. So let me tell you and the listeners a little secret from somebody who's been in HR, who's been in recruiting, who's been sitting in meetings when we're creating positions and talking about who is going to go there. By the time you hear about it, if you're hearing about it, it means that the company's already thought about who's right for it and hasn't settled on anyone. Right?
Wow.
So if you're saying, "Oh, I haven't seen anything," that doesn't mean that there's nothing available. No, right? Many times either something comes about and somebody gets grabbed and put into it right away because they're already doing those things and it never even got to you. Or even if you're really great at it, we can invent things for people who are good, right?
Yes.
We can find places for them to go and grow. So it's a really, really self-destructive mindset I think that people get sometimes, and I've worked with them. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily because they're bad, but it's backwards thinking.
Sure.
Right. It's backwards thinking to think about if I get this position, then I'll be worthy for it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Much better to think, let me become worthy first.
Or they'll say, when I become a leader, then I'll start doing the responsibilities and doing what a leader does.
Right. And I think it's a fine line too. Is your first question asked, when am I ready? But the sooner you can start demonstrating that, and by the way, this goes back to your first question. I would come back to it. Like, how do we start demonstrating it? Take the smallest steps, right? I'll tell you right now, businesses crave leaders now more than ever, right? People crave and need people who can keep other people on board.
Yeah.
It's more necessary than ever, and they are not easy to find. It's easy to find people who want the position and the paycheck and sort of go through the motions. Easy to find those folks. Not so easy to find the ones who people run through the metaphorical brick walls for.
That's
Right?
very true.
That is not easy to find. Like if you can do that, there is always going to be space for you somewhere. I can guarantee you.
Yeah. Everyone listening, pretty much for the most part, I'm sure everyone listening either is a high performer or they want to be a high performer. And they're probably really good at what they do, right? They've got the competency part down. What happens and what do you recommend when somebody is such a high performer, they want to become a leader, they start practicing and doing the duties before they even have the title of leader? What happens when that person's direct leader begins to get insecure about that? What do you recommend here? Because it's a touchy subject.
It is very much so. So in a perfect world, that high performer works for the Tina of the company, right? Who encourages this.
Yeah.
But in the real world, that's not always the way it is. In the real world, that might not be the situation. And it can be touchy. That's why I want to emphasize, like, start with the smallest steps. And you want to look for the needs of people around you. Again, go back to our definition, helping somebody rise to a challenge. How can you do that in a small way? How can you talk to your manager and sort of get the feeling from them, whether it's directly asking or indirectly, in what ways can I do this to you that is going to help you, not make you see it as something that stands in your way?
So have that conversation.
Have that conversation.
Huh.
I thought, I see Sally needs some help. Okay with you if I run her and help her.
Hmm.
And you may need to frame it in a way and listen to their, listen to their feedback and their body language in a way that you can sense how you can help them versus how you can present yourself as a threat. And that may take a lot of, again, being on the balcony.
Yeah.
And it's hard for somebody, by the way, once you get this desire to help people, to hold back.
Yeah.
Start expressing it in small ways. And then the more you can be alignment with what that person sees as beneficial, the better you are. Because at the end of the day, there's one thing that almost everybody in corporate America wants, and that's that they want to look good to the person above them.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you have a boss, one thing they want more than anything else is they want to look good to their boss.
Mm-hmm.
If you find a way to help them do that, and you're able to, and this is the second very important point, and you're able and willing to take any credit you give and give it back to your boss
Got it.
publicly, very few people will steer away from that. What they fear sometimes is somebody who's going to steal their spotlight.
Yeah.
So when you can act in that way, and if somebody recognizes it, sort of suck it up and say, well, I was only able to do this because of, whoever it is, because Brandon helped me as a great boss. Like, even if you have to sort of like fight your way through that, that is a great way to get your boss to love whatever you're doing and to build your leadership skills.
Just give credit, give credit, give credit, and communicate.
Exactly. And here's the thing with that. Even though it might feel disingenuous to do that, and it might feel like self-defeating, people know people know who are doing good things.
Mm.
If you
Yes.
have a boss that's operating in the scarcity mindset, I guarantee you this is no surprise to anybody else who deals with them a lot.
100%.
Right? And they can see who's really doing things. Now, publicly, we can say, yeah, give them the credit, share credit, share credit, share credit. And that just gives us more runway to lead.
Yes. And, going to the person above you and having the conversation of, hey, I want to help out however I can. Let's take this actually, and let's move it in the direction of, because that's a difficult conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can be difficult, especially if you're not the most versed in emotional intelligence, right? We're not taught that in the education system. It's either something that you have through growing up or you might not have it at all. So how can you approach a difficult conversation with somebody in the workplace? I feel like it's similar when it's somebody in the workplace, or maybe even someone like your spouse, someone in your family. I feel that it's similar, but I want your take on it. How do you start that difficult conversation?
Right. Well, there's all sorts of difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And I would, depending on the difficult conversation, the steps might be a little bit different. But if I can, let me approach it first from the situation of a boss with a team member or a leader with a team member.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a little bit different order than I would say for your situation.
Okay.
For a leader with a team member, the process starts before it starts. It starts with a culture of accountability and open communication about performance. I can't tell you how many people, Brandon, never have those conversations or rarely have those conversations. It is not normal to come and say, hey, Brandon, let's talk about your performance on this project. What was great about it? What wasn't? We don't have those conversations. And people are in the dark, and the more we don't do it, the more almost taboo it becomes to do it, or the more difficult it becomes to do it.
Yeah.
So that's why I say it begins before it begins. It begins with a culture where we're used to having those types of conversations. The other part of this is separating performance from the person.
Yes.
If you have an employee, Brandon, or somebody out there is a leader at work and they have a performance problem, what we tend to do if left to our own devices many times is we criticize the person. I asked you to do this, you didn't do that. What is wrong with you? Why are you failing? These are the sort of words we use, if not directly, indirectly. And when you come at most people like that, it's going to trigger fight or flight, neither of which are good for you, right? If flight happens, they shut down. They don't say a word. They sit there and listen. They look down at the floor, maybe cross their arms, and they just listen to us say what we have to say, and you get zero feedback from them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people will fight, right? Some people don't go down easy. How dare you say that about me? That's not true. Don't you know I did this? Don't you know I did this? Have you looked at what Tim is up to? He's 10 times worse than me. Or even if you get a really bold one, how can you say this to me, Brandon? I saw what you did. You're not perfect. How dare you tell me? And you'll get both of those reactions if you work with enough people and come at them in a way that's blaming. The key really is to focus on performance. Yeah, you're a great person. I know you want to do what's best. I know you're on board with what we're doing here. Let's look at this project. Did we meet our goals or didn't we? Let's look at the data. And if we didn't, how can we talk about maybe the way this project can be handled better next time? I would sometimes even say to people, and I strangely found this really effective as a leader, let's separate your performance from you. Let's pretend your performance is a cube on the table, I would say. And everything you did is in this box. We're taking it out of you. We're putting it in this box on the table that we are both objectively looking at.
Mm.
Another application of balcony, right? Another way
Yes.
of looking at it. Objectively, if you and I were both look at this performance, let's talk about where it was great and maybe some places it could have been better. A little tactic again to sort of get people to move from he's not criticizing me, we're both looking at ways to make the performance better.
Wow.
Much easier for people to take.
Yes.
Now to go back, and the other step in that I think, which would go back to your first question, as a speaker or a trainer, this is something maybe you've used consciously or even subconsciously, is the principle of pebble rock boulder. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
Pebble rock boulder is where you're training or leading somebody and you have someone, you've done training sessions, many, right? This is what you do. You're an expert. Have you ever had somebody start to derail you?
All the time.
Right?
Not all the time, but it happens. Yeah.
Right. They start to derail, sometimes intentionally, sometimes they come in hostile, especially if it's like a mandatory training. People
Yeah.
sometimes come in, I'm going to show him. Who's this guy to tell me what to do? And other times you get well-meaning people who just like take you totally off topic because they want to tell their story and they want everybody to see the world the way they see it.
Yeah.
And if you let them go, you'll spend half an hour on it.
Yeah.
Can't do it. So Pebble Rock Boulder says there's at least 3 different ways of doing this. The pebble is what we start with. The pebble is, oh, that's really interesting, John. Let's circle back. Let's put a pin in that and come back to it. Right? A really kind, gentle way of saying, not now, right? But really in a way that honors that person, and in a way that lets them save face. Most people will react positively to the pebble. You know, now if they don't and they come back, then we use our rock. Our rock is a little less gentle way of saying, not now. And that might come out as, yeah, Tim, we already talked about that. I realize that's important to you, but our group is talking about this right now.
Yeah.
And then the boulder might be, we've already talked about this 3 times. If you talk about this anymore, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave, right?
Yes.
That's the boulder. We don't start with the boulder because that is going to be self-defeating.
Mm. And you follow the same process when you're talking about a behavior that you want to help someone stop.
Exactly. Can we start with the pebble? Can we start with the pebble? So to go back to your question about how would I go to my boss if I want to start having this conversation with them? especially if it's somebody who's got that scarcity mentality, you probably wouldn't go in and say, I feel you don't listen to me at all. I think you've got deep psychological problems. I hate working for you, and you better listen to me now. I have an agenda that I want us both to go through for the next 3 hours, right? That's boulder talk. Probably not going to work. But can we think of a pebble?
Mm,
Can we think of, you know, I just noticed, I couldn't help but notice Sarah's doing this. I know you probably know it too as a boss. I think I have a way that I can help her. Is it okay with you if I do that?
yes.
Right? How can we go at him with a pebble?
Yes.
And we go help Sarah. And when Sarah says thank you, we say, oh, I'm happy to help you. But it was really our boss that did all this.
Mm,
Sarah goes back, thanks the boss so much for helping me. Win-win, right?
yeah.
We've exercised a little bit of leadership using our pebble. We've been able to share credit. Gives us a little bit more runway for next time.
Yeah.
So I think if I was trying to get somebody to let me, stretch my leadership legs a little bit, that'd be a great way to do it. Find that little pebble way we can start with, where we're not coming across as a threat to them.
Yes. Emotional intelligence and communication is just like the lifeblood of leadership. I remember when I first became a leader in the company I work for, I became a leader and then I was removed from leadership because I was 19 years old. I was all about me. I didn't know how to properly communicate with people. I'll tell you, Brian, everything changed for me as a leader when I read How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I finally realized that people don't really care too much about me. They care about them. And we have to care about them and make them feel heard and use the pebble versus throwing the boulder at them. And we're just not taught these things. And it's something that it's why your book is more needed now than ever, because we've got a workforce of Gen Z is entering the leadership workforce now, and millennials are in the leadership workforce. Like, we didn't learn these things. I guess really, I have two more things for you. The first thing before that is, what would you recommend to a new millennial leader who doesn't really know where to start? They're a leader, right? Maybe they had to jump in the role or they just got entered into the role. How can they improve their skills in the fastest time possible in order to be equipped for the new role that they're in today's world?
Short answer, find a coach.
Okay.
And that could be a literal leadership coach, or it could be somebody in your organization who is willing to help you. It might be a coach, it might be more of a mentor role. That'd be the best way.
Okay.
Now, there are certainly other tools. I'd like to think that my book is a helpful tool.
Yeah.
I know your book is a helpful tool. Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, definitely helpful tools. They're out expose yourself to that kind of thinking,
Okay.
because that's the second best. Now, as much as I love leadership books, and I'd like to think I wrote a pretty good one,
Mm.
real life is always a little bit different. When you're dealing with human beings, they're unpredictable. And just realize there's still going to be a degree of trial and error. But if you are headed down that growth path and are willing to be objective, there is a lot of information out there that can help you do better. I would lean into my empathy side. I would lean into my vision side.
Okay.
I could go on, but I think that's a good start.
It is. And we keep talking about your book, just so everybody knows. The first link in the description below, grab a copy of Brian's book. It's right on Amazon. It's incredible. The cool thing about this book I was talking to Brian about before the interview is it's not the longest read in the world. It's about, I think it's like a little bit over 60 pages long. And it's an amazing book that you can put in your desk drawer or carry around with you in your work bag. And if you run into a leadership problem or a situation where you need to communicate or whatever it might be, you can pull this out before you have that conversation and just brush up on the chapter, take away a strategy that you can use in real time, because we're not trained in today's world on leadership. And we need this book, we need a coach, and we just have to practice these principles.
Yeah, absolutely. And two things. First of all, quick story, just because I wanted to honor your story and your transparency about how you struggled, when you were young. I opened the book in the intro telling about probably my worst failure, one of my worst failures as a leader. Similar boat. I was a little bit older than you were, but I had good intentions and an absolute lack of the right skills,
Hmm.
and it hurt people.
Yeah.
Um, and that's, I think, one of the dangers that we don't talk enough about is when you are a leader, your mistakes just don't affect you anymore. They don't. You're impacting other people's lives and their livelihoods. So to me, even beyond the business sense, I think there's a lot of business sense in being a good leader, right? I think there's a lot. I think it'll help you make more money. I think it'll help you get promoted faster. I think it'll help you build your reputation and open up the doors to so many good things. But I also think there's just, maybe this is my, soft side coming out. I think it's our moral duty to do good.
Yes.
And when you're a leader and you have a team of people, you are an influence in their lives. You get to choose what kind of influence you want to be.
Wow. It's a choice then, huh?
Absolutely. Are you going to be have the kind of employees that dread coming to work on Monday? That go home happy or unhappy and upset, and that rubs off on the kids and it rubs off on the spouse and the dog, right? Because we carry this stuff with us.
Yeah.
If you have somebody who's unhappy for 40 hours a week, they're unhappy.
Very true.
Or you can be the kind of person that the people love to work for, right? And not saying work is easy. It's not saying it's not challenging, but people feel a sense of connection. They feel that somebody cares about them. Somebody's pushing them to be better,
Hmm.
and that has its own ripple effects that are positive.
Yeah.
So, at its very base, I think this is a choice of which one you want to be.
You get such a platform to make a true positive difference in other people's lives. And it's what's inspired me to move on and go on YouTube and coach and have clients, because I loved leading people and helping people within my company, but I wanted to branch more out of that and expand that reach.
Yeah, and this is what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're a leader for anybody who's coming on here and listening. It's been amazing.
I have one last question for you. And it's kind of going to put you on the spot, but I'm really curious to see how you answer this. Let's say it's your final day on earth, right? You've lived your life, you've studied leadership, you've dived into leadership, you've lived it. And it's your final day and somebody hands you a piece of paper with a pen and they say, "Brian, nothing that you've created up until this point will be here after you're gone. The only thing that will stay here and be here, not even your book, it's no longer here, right? The only thing that will stay and be here are these two leadership truths that you write on this piece of paper, that every leader in every organization and every family and every community is going to get, and they're going to know what these truths are." What two leadership truths would you write down on this piece of paper to leave as your legacy?
Hmm. First one, leadership is not about you. That's an easy one.
Wow.
We make it about ourselves and how I see the world and how I want things to be, and my style. People better adapt to my style. It's not about you, right? If you want to influence people, it's about the people you lead. You become the method to make that happen. You're the catalyst, not the change agent as a leader, right?
Yeah.
It's not about you. It's about helping those people achieve what they want to achieve. And I think the second one, you know, I may clumsily steal from Maya Angelou. I think she's the one who said, people remember how they made us feel
Mm,
long after they remember what we did. And I think if there's somebody my age, a little bit of an older guy, we can think back about our favorite bosses. And we don't think about the good days or the bad days or the projects or our assignment or whether we think about how that person make me feel,
yeah.
right? And I think leadership, a big part of that is how do you want to be remembered by people when it's all said and done?
Hmm.
It doesn't mean, by the way, you're an easy boss. It doesn't mean that you don't have big goals. It means you are the catalyst that helps people do great things.
A lot of the times when I ask leaders who their role model was or who was a mentor for them, a lot of the times their answer is somebody from a past company they worked for that was their direct boss or a leader. We make such an impact on people, and well, it might not be known at that exact time that you're making an impact, you do it to help them, because they'll remember how you feel, and they'll pass that along to everyone else that they encounter too.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you.
leadership is not about you, and leadership is not about you, and make people feel how you want them to feel. What would you write on that paper for the second one?
Ah,
What's the action step there?
I think the action step. I think the action step. I'm gonna. You borrow the phrase I used before. Be the catalyst, not the change agent.
I love that. Be the
People have to,
catalyst.
people have to change themselves. They have to decide whether or not to change. You can't make them change, but you can be the catalyst. You
Hmm,
can spark.
that's powerful. Brian, we've talked about so much on this interview, so much wisdom. I thank you so much for your time. Again, 10 Habits of Influential Leaders by Brian Rollo. Go on Amazon, first link in the description. Grab a copy of this book. Take you a few days to read, and it'll change the way that you lead people. And if you don't lead people now, this will be a great way for you to enter that world and really to make an even bigger difference than you might be making right now. Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Brandon. This was great.